This is North Pod, a North Melbourne fan podcast, hosted by Jason Hunt.
Now the backs there are. He backs it. He kicks it. Oh, the fall from Dersma. This is the speed of the culture. 3 bounces down the wing. He keeps going. 4 bounces. Joining the chorus. The can't lose Kangers. AFLW premiers.
Hello, welcome back once again to North Pod, and boy, that I said it a few points during that game to some people I was speaking with. That might be some of the worst football I've seen in a long time. That game against the West Coast Eagles over in Bunbury. It's a shame that the showcase that location has got for its first AFL game was that, because yeah, that was shocking. Probably some of the worst I've seen over the past 5 years. But we play 10 solid minutes at the start of the game, 10 solid minutes at the end, and somehow we won the game. Kind of unbelievable. Thank goodness for that. I would be surprised if anyone is walking away from that feeling good about it. But I suppose, look, we'll take the 4 points and try to analyse what on earth happened in that game, because it was not good. Just before we jump in, I did have an episode last week. I had planned to do a bit of a mid-season review with Dean from #Kangaroos and Josh from Further North and Bailey from the Shinboners. It just didn't work out. Timing and timetables meant that we weren't able to record together. Dino and Josh recorded a mid-season podcast together. They were able to make that happen, so you could definitely go listen to that. But yeah, timing didn't work out for me, so that's okay. First in-season week I've had off in 2.5 seasons, and I guess I'm fresh, just like the boys have freshened up. I've freshened up, so I do apologise for that, but as they say, life gets in the way. Anyway, luckily we've had this amazing game of football to come back to. So let's jump in and review this game against the West Coast Eagles. Review time. We start with team selection, and some interesting team selections here. So Finbar Maley omitted, I think fair. He had I think a 4-game stretch to show a little bit. He did show a little bit, but he wasn't blowing our socks off. So he was omitted, and Aiden Core, with a bit of an injury, was also an out. So we had to bring 2 in. Griffin Logue makes sense as an inclusion for Aiden Core, an experienced defender out, an experienced defender in. And Robert Hansen Jr. came in for Finbar and played the sub role, which, a forward type for a forward type. We've obviously swapped a tall for a small. I was really expecting Cooper Harvey to come in instead of Robert Hansen Jr. I'm fairly sure that Cooper was the travelling emergency. He didn't play VFL on the weekend and was the listed emergency that didn't play. So for me, that's the option I would have liked to see. I really would like a look at Cooper Harvey. He's out of contract end of this year, hasn't played since 2023, because he didn't play last year at all. And I think we need to look at him at AFL level. He's been busting down the door in terms of kicking goals at VFL level, which is not everything, but we would like a goal kicker in our side. So I really thought we'd see him. Hansen Jr. came in. And I guess, my antenna went up a little bit, because both Hansen Jr. and Logue are WA boys. And part of me wondered whether or not we've selected them because we're playing these 2 games in WA. It gives them a chance to head over and see family and play in front of family. Look, I hope that's not the case. I get the romanticism involved, but I probably thought that Callan Dawson would have been a better selection than Griffin Logue. He was, again, one of the emergencies. So, yeah, I guess just question marks for me. We'll talk about both of their games, but not a lot to talk about for Hansen Jr. as the sub. Didn't do a lot wrong, but also didn't really do much with the time that he had. But Griffin Logue, I do have some thoughts on. So, look, some question marks there with the inclusions. We go to the game, and 9-8, 62 North Melbourne, 6-16, 52 West Coast. So a 10-point win. It certainly didn't feel like a 10-point win at all. And you can see from the scoring shots, 17-22 the Eagles' way. They dominated large portions of the game. We'll talk about it, but the ball lived in their half of the ground. We weren't able to transition the football at all. And except for the start and the end of the game, like I said, in those kind of 10-minute patches, we really, really struggled to score. I reckon we had one, maybe two goals outside of those periods of time. So, yeah, I guess looking at the way the game started, like I said, we started relatively promisingly. I thought Caleb Daniel got involved early. He did have a turnover on the wing, sort of trying to kick in board that I think is a little bit emblematic of the way that he's played this year. It was the right idea, but the wrong execution. And, that's the sort of thing that I think we'd like to see him tighten up a little bit. I thought overall he really, came into the game and found a way to distribute pretty effectively, but didn't love the way that he started with that disposal. I thought it was great to see Nick Larkey and Jack Darling taking leading marks high up the ground, sort of on the wing and up at half-back early on. It's usually a good sign to get those key tools involved with a touch early on. And I thought, based on that, I thought, great, we're in for a good day. We're going to have those key tools active and involved in the game. We really didn't see much of either of them beyond those two moments, unfortunately. They weren't really involved much. And were quite disappointing, the two of them, really. Particularly Larkey, I think, because he's playing on a lesser name. We'll talk about his matchup as the game goes on. You'd expect him to kick a goal or two. So the fact that he was held goalless was disappointing. Paul Curtis is one that wasn't disappointing. Won a free kick, based on the year that he's having and the pressure that he puts on defenders. Won a free kick, a bit of a 50-50, so you like, as a fan, you like to see your good players get the benefit of the doubt, I suppose, because, like I said, he's obviously going to be pressured by opponents because of the year that he's having. He won a free kick, kicked a goal early, and you can tell that he's really making defenders nervous. That's a great thing for us. Kicked a couple of goals in the first quarter, Paul Curtis. Just massive. His contest, his kicking, he's kicked two and was involved in the chain that led to Zerha's contested mark. A little bit later on, he missed the goal, but Paul Curtis just involved in everything that was going well for us early on. I thought our clearance work to start the game was really strong. Xerri was dominant. Luke Parker was good forward and in the middle when he went in there. Won a really brave free kick for front on contact and was able to kick a goal as well. And then we saw up the other end, West Coast started letting us off, which became a bit of a trend. Archer Reid from close range took a really, really nice contested mark just outside the goal square. Wasn't quite in the goal square, so was put on a bit of an angle and then missed one that he absolutely should have kicked. And I think probably that was the one that started the rot for West Coast. They had a couple of misses that were, whatever, like so you're going to miss some. But they ended up missing quite a few as the game went on, which became a bit of a trend until that third quarter where they were able to break things open and kick a few goals. And we saw, I guess, towards the back end of that first quarter, some of those mistakes from us start to creep in. I mean, Charlie Conman takes a nice mark, gives the handball to McKercher, who's running backwards and not necessarily, with his eyes up to look ahead, who then has to, kick a dangerous ball inboard, which turned over. So that's the kind of stuff where it's like, it's great to want to move the ball on and it's great to want to have that aggression with our ball movement, but let's at least make it smart. Let's move the ball on in a way which gives us an advantage. I don't feel like we were doing that early on. Had a couple of bad turnovers to end the quarter. McKercher again was one that he had a really, really up and down game. I thought he found a lot of the footy, did a lot of good things, but a couple of moments throughout the game that he'd want back. He got caught by Harley Reid holding the ball. Wasn't hurt on the scoreboard by Reid, who missed the resultant kick. But yeah, it was just an onslaught of inside 50s for the Eagles in the back end of that first quarter. They weren't able to hurt us. I think they ended with 5 points in the first quarter. I'll just check that as I'm talking. But you could tell that after that first 10 minutes or so, the momentum really swung towards the Eagles and really didn't swing back our way for quite some time. It was at quarter time we were 3-2-20 and West Coast were 0-5 points. And then the second quarter was just some of the worst footy you'll see. The Eagles kicked 1 goal, 3. We kicked 1 goal, 1 point rather. So a halftime scoreline of 21-14 really did sum up the sort of footy that we're watching in the second quarter. Not a lot of notes here other than the fact that we were getting belted at the contest in the tackle game. which was something that we were doing well, the contest work in the first quarter. That really dropped off, and we weren't being first to footy in that second quarter. And the Eagles' pressure, I wouldn't say it was immense, but it was certainly enough to really put the clamps on us, and we just weren't able to transition the footy at all. We didn't have any cohesion with the way that we were possessing the ball and moving the ball. We had one foray forward, which Curtis and Xerri sort of combined to butcher and weren't able to kick a goal from. It was one of those ones where if we're up and about, we're playing well, they were able to handball chain or skip over hand pass to the next person and find the free play to kick a goal. But our confidence was down. We weren't able to make that happen. And for the vast majority of the quarter, the ball was living sort of just on the fringes of West Coast 50, either just inside or just outside. Like I mentioned, they dominated the inside 50. It was a really, really depressing quarter of football to watch, but they weren't able to quite put the finishing touches on. Their entries were reminiscent of the way that we enter the forward 50 at times. A lot of long bombs, a lot of kicks that just miss targets, and a lot of kicking sideways, but slowly rather than moving it quickly and opening up space. So similarly, or I guess in similar fashion to that first quarter, they just weren't able to damage us. They did eventually kick one after they'd kicked 8 points, but to end the half 21-14 really showed that the game had turned after that first 10-minute period. And looking on social media and just the way that I felt, there was a sense of what on earth we're watching. Like we've gone backwards. It's such disappointing footy to watch. It was slow. We weren't able to hit simple targets. And, it was really our back end that was holding us up. I thought McDonald stood up really well. I thought Comben stood up really well. He was spoiling, not necessarily getting his intercept game going, but was able to negate the opposition forwards. Toby Pink had a really good game on Oscar Allen, was holding up well. So, I thought, defensively we were quite strong and, not amazing because the Eagles certainly were able to score, but we were able to at least put the pressure on them and limit their scoring. But we just weren't able to distribute and get the ball out of our back half effectively enough and find space. So halftime, things really weren't looking good. After halftime, you kind of were expecting a response, or certainly I was expecting a response coming out in the third quarter, and we just didn't see it. It was more of the same. Harley Reid caught Colin McKercher holding the ball again. It was an interesting battle to see those two. They weren't head to head, but they certainly found themselves matched up at times. McKercher was kind of playing off halfback, and Reid was playing a forward midfield role. So there were times where they were matched up, and obviously the number 1 and 2 draft picks from a couple of years ago. Reid definitely got the better of him in those physical contests, but I thought McKercher was really good when he was chaining up and running and distributing. So it was an interesting battle, but it always hurts to get caught holding the ball twice by the same player. In terms of the way that the game was played, though, it was just the same. We could not, for the life of us, tackle to impact their disposal or kick the football. So the Eagles were able to tackle us, either clamp the arms or, force us to dispose of the footy quickly and in a rushed manner. Whereas when we were tackling, we were just falling into that classic routine of, sure, we tackled them, but we allowed them to get their arms free. We allowed them the time to make decision with disposal and get their hand pass out or get a quick kick out to their advantage. So whilst I don't think the tackle numbers ended up super lopsided, their tackles were certainly more effective, the Eagles than ours. And throughout the game, you could notice it. Like we just weren't able to effectively shut down what they were trying to do with their contested work and their transitioning of the football. And it wasn't looking good. I thought watching that third quarter that for sure we were going to lose this game. The Eagles were finally able to actually kick a couple of goals. They kicked 4 in this quarter to our 2. And took the lead going into three-quarter time, 44-33. So, particularly, I think the first half of that third quarter was a bit of a tussle, but as it went on, the Eagles were able to kick a couple of goals, and you could tell that I guess our backs broke a little bit. The momentum that they'd been building up, and the pressure they'd been putting on, kind of boiled over a little bit, and they were able to finally get some scores on the board. And in the reverse direction, we had opportunities. Parker gave away a blocking free kick after we'd finally taken a mark inside 50. I don't know if it was there, to be fair, but it was certainly, there was enough there that the umpire paid it. And it's just one of those, I guess, almost unforced errors. You finally get the ball in there. You just want to kick an easy goal, and we found a way to ruin it. It was just turnover after turnover. Every time we tried to transition the footy, we couldn't mark it. We dropped simple marks. Tom Powell, for example, dropped a simple mark that he should have taken in the back half, or we'd miss 20-metre kicks that, were sort of kicks that you should hit 90% of the time. We were hitting them maybe 20 or 30% of the time. Like, simple stuff that it wasn't as though we were biting off these really challenging kicks that were going to open up the game for us. We were biting off kicks that, were the next link in the chain, and that we weren't able to hit those targets. So it was a really, really tough watch. Just sitting there watching it, you thought, we're going to lose this game, and all of a sudden we're going to find ourselves entrenched in the bottom two of the ladder again. That's certainly what I was thinking watching it. And then, as if things weren't bad enough, Charlie Conman was subbed off with an arm injury of some description. It was unclear whether it was shoulder or collarbone, but certainly some kind of injury up there, which is a concern. We know he's had some injuries across his AFL and pre-AFL life. I feel like the last 18 months he's had a really solid run in it, not really had too much to worry about with, major injuries. So hopefully that's not a major one. I guess we'll wait to find out. I'm sure there'll be some scans and some follow-up, but he was subbed out so Robert Hansen Jr. could come into the game sort of midway through the third quarter. Really the only thing that went our way was West Coast stupidity. We kicked a goal from, really silly 50-metre penalty from them where they stepped over the mark, allowed us a quick inside 50, which meant that Simpkin was able to goal. That came right after a really nice moment. Elmac went back with the flight, made a contest in the air on half back. I think it was either his kick or the next kick that was then marked that the West Coast player infringed, and it was a 50-metre penalty, and we just played on quick and got it to Jai Simpkin for a goal. So the fact that we took that for us to kick a goal was I guess illustrative of how badly things were going for us. Funnily enough, in the last quarter, it was the same thing. We won a 50-metre penalty, and Finn O'Sullivan was able to kick a goal, which started our momentum and got things going our way. So I think it goes to show that whilst it was a good feeling to win, in a lot of ways, I think West Coast lost this game. They kicked so inaccurately. They made some really crucial, silly mistakes that allowed us to kick goals and win back some momentum. And yeah, I certainly wouldn't say that was through amazing football by us. It was just through the Eagles really not knowing how to win, which I think we can relate to as well. Xerri, throughout the entire game, was dominant, took it out of the ruck and was really competitive in that area, won a lot of clearances, won a lot of hit-outs, and was a major reason why we were able to get the game going our way in the first and the last quarter. That being said, he wasn't mistake-free. It was a moment where he took it out of the ruck in the back line, and if you're doing that, you have to be careful with how you're disposing of it. You cannot dump kick, essentially, and that's unfortunately exactly what he did. He took it out of the ruck. He had a quick kick. It was a really high kick, gave it a lot of airtime. Tom Cole took the mark, who's a backman for West Coast, and then he was able to slot it from 50 metres out for his first career goal, I believe. And that's where you've got to, if you're taking out the ruck in that scenario, you either have to lock it in, you've got to get hand pass to someone who's got some time to think about it, or if you simply have to do the release kick, it's got to go boundary side. So, Xerri had an amazing game, but I think that's the sort of thing that you'd be coaching him on and saying this is where he can take his game to the next step. It's not always, even if just because you can take it out of the ruck doesn't mean that you should every time. And I think that was probably a moment where he probably shouldn't have taken it out of the ruck. And Paul Curtis, my note here says, thank goodness for Paul Curtis. Whenever he's near it, it's been good. I did butcher a kick in that second quarter, but besides that, every time he was near it, good things happened, and he was able to kick a goal for us late in that quarter, kick his third to, I guess, just keep us in touch, to be honest, because prior to that, things were not looking good. We were essentially 3 goals down. That goal kept us within biting distance going into the last quarter. And I thought we started that last quarter pretty strongly. We had some momentum. We just didn't have that last kick to connect it to a goal. There was several moments where we were able to win the ball, get it inside 50, but just not quite have that connection with our forwards. Shees will put one up way too high and too slow, where he could have maybe taken an extra step and steadied and either kick the goal himself or kick a drop punt, but it was one of those round the corner kicks that just need some airtime, and that was able to be intercepted, goes out the other end, and unfortunately, I think that was the moment that the former Hawks player, whose name is escaping me right now, I'll get there, and Tyler Brockman, he snapped a goal that, after a few more points, that put them 18 points up, and I think at that point we're all feeling like, we've had our momentum. We've had that push. We weren't able to kick goals. It's gone up the other end, and West Coast kicked one. Maybe we're done here. That's certainly how I felt but based on the way the rest of the game had gone, West Coast had so many inside 50s. They'd had so many opportunities to put us away, and it seemed as though they were about to do that. Fortunately, Finn O'Sullivan, I mentioned this before, he took a mark or won a free kick. I'm not sure. It must have been a mark. Two West Coast players essentially ran through the protected area. So you can take your pick. We got a 50-metre penalty. He kicked his first goal, and that was what I guess started the comeback. From that point on, West Coast didn't score. And we kicked the net the last 4 goals, also kicked some points to go with that, and end up winning by 10 points. But, we certainly did it the hard way. It wasn't, like I said, it wasn't necessarily a great victory. It wasn't one of those ones where you go, what a comeback, gee, that was determination and grit. It was more like, I don't know how we won that, but thank goodness. That was the main feeling. After that Finn O'Sullivan goal, we saw Griffin Logue, who did not have a good game, but he bit off an inboard kick that absolutely was not on. Somehow it came off. Robert Hansen Jr. was able to gather the ball. He found Sheasel, who found Xerri to kick a goal, and that put us only 6 points down. And I think at that point, once we kicked that second goal that we were able to create from our own chaos, for want of a better word, I think that's where there started to be some belief. Zach Fisher missed several opportunities in this last quarter. He ended up with 3 points. He had to kick one on the run. It was a really nice handball chain through the middle of the ground that he wasn't able to finish off. Finn O'Sullivan had a massive last quarter. He won a really big contest on half forward, which released McKercher and allowed Xerri to take a really important contested mark and kicked a goal that put us in front, which was, you could argue that was the moment of the game when Finn O'Sullivan won that contest and got it forward. Xerri's mark was fantastic. He was essentially being spoiled by Paul Curtis from behind and reined it in and was able to then go back and kick not a regulation set shot, but the size of the moment I think made it even harder than it looked. Then we had to defend a lead. We had 5 or 6 minutes, maybe it was less than that, but we had time where we had to defend the lead. I thought Xerri took a mark and probably moved on a little bit too quickly at one point. Went for a kick over the back to Robert Hansen Jr. that was never going to be really on, particularly a player of Hansen Jr.'s contested work. It just wasn't something that was the right option. I thought in that moment, is that the mistake that we've made? We've given them back possession. Then again, Simpkin, I think not long after that, from that resultant boundary throw in, kicked a point, and again you thought, all right, we've given West Coast the ball back with a minute to go. Is this where we see them go end to end and finally put us out of our misery? But no, it was actually Jai Simpkin then making up for it shortly after, kicked a goal, a nice snap. It was really composed. He took all the time that he had, kicked the goal, and that was just utter relief, to be honest. It was not elation, it wasn't happiness, it wasn't anything other than just relief, because I think if we had gone on to lose that game, the ramifications would have been massive. I still think internally there should be a really, really hard look at how it was that we were dominated by West Coast for the best part of 3 quarters. But fortunately, Simpkin kicked his second goal. We win the game by 10 points, and what ends up looking like a pretty dominant last quarter after a pretty dominant first quarter as well, or part of that first quarter at least. In those periods, we kicked 7 of our 9 goals. At the start of the first quarter and end of the last quarter, 7 of our 9 goals. So that just says to me that there was a big period of that game where we weren't able to get possession, weren't able to win the footy, and just weren't able to do enough. Yeah, look, it's an important win. It gets us out of that bottom 2. Had we lost this game, I think it would be hard to see us finishing out of the bottom 2 this year. It was a really big swing game for us. Yeah, just a really disappointing game overall, but thankfully we do get the win, and I think it kind of, to some extent, balances out those games where we've played well but haven't been able to get the win or quite get across the line. This is kind of the opposite. We did not play well, but we were able to win somehow through a bit of luck and a bit of playing well and a bit of West Coast not knowing how to win, really. And I think as a fan, we have to go chalk it up as a win, move on. You probably hope that the playing group isn't doing that, I would say. Story of the game time, and I think I kind of alluded to it during the review section. It was a little bit like stepping in a time machine and watching a game from 2022 or even the pandemic. our skills were awful. Just awful during the game. We missed 20-metre kicks. We dropped easy marks. We turned it over in the middle of the ground far too easily and just looked without a second option going from the back half to our forward half. It was quite jarring how poor we were with the way that we transitioned the footy. I think for me, what was most disappointing was we didn't see any adjustments. We didn't see us try to do something different. All we saw was us turning it over with skill errors and silly decisions. And not being able to move the ball from our back half to our front half. 75 turnovers for the game, well above our season average, well more than the Eagles had. And I think that's the thing that I would be, if I was in the coaching group, I'd be grabbing those 75 turnovers and finding the 10 to 15 that you go, sure, nothing wrong with these, this is just what happens, but really analysing the rest of those and going, all right, was this a skill error? Was this a decision-making error? Was it a combination of the two? Like, what is the coaching point that we can take out of those turnovers? Because for me, I think there are a lot of times where the decision-making was actually good. We were trying to bite off a kick that would have opened up a bit of space for us, but we missed it. Or there were definitely times where we, like I mentioned the Charlie Comben one earlier on, like it's his hand pass that put McKerch under pressure, which meant that he had to do a bad kick. It sort of passed on the pressure and passed on the poor decision-making. So you'd want to be analysing those pretty closely, I think. Never have we needed more than a circuit breaker than we did. I guess what I'm trying to say there is there was periods in the game where the fact that the Eagles weren't able to kick a goal, I think, worked against us. We just need to get the ball back into the middle of the ground so we can have a reset. We can have a 4v4 in the middle of the ground, win a clearance and get the ball going our way and get momentum going our way. But because the Eagles were so bad at finishing their work, there was that period through the second and third quarter where essentially the ball just lived at half back for the Eagles and there wasn't a circuit breaker. There wasn't a moment where we could reset. They just refused to kick goals until late in that third quarter, really. So part of me wonders if we had got it back to the middle of the ground, during that slump, potentially we would have been able to reset. Xerri's ruck work so important. Maybe you get LDU going. Maybe Jai Simpkin comes into the game. Like, a lot of our mids really struggled to get into the game and impact it. And I think a big reason for that is because the ball was just living at half back and there was so many players around the footy. It was really hard for them to do their best work. I think by the time West Coast did finally kick those goals late in the third quarter, it didn't help us because it was more like a backbreaker rather than a reset. They finally kicked a goal and they were able to kick a few more because of that momentum and that pressure that they built up. So really, really need to review what was happening in that second and third quarter and why we were turning it over so frequently and in such dangerous positions. We ended up losing the inside 50s 63 to 41, but before that last quarter, it was a lot more dire than that. It was an absolute belting in terms of possession and territory, and we just weren't able to do enough to alleviate that and to get the ball going our way. We weren't able, like I said, to get our damaging midfielders into the game. Wardlaw only had 9 touches, LDU had 18, and we saw flashes of his brilliance in that last quarter. He's got such good footwork, he's able to create space for himself where there's seemingly none, but he just wasn't able to find enough of the football and impact enough contests. And again, part of that is because of where the ball was living, but I think a midfielder that should be our best midfielder should be able to, I guess, push past that and find the footy in those difficult situations. We can't be downhill skiers. We can't afford to be downhill skiers given the position that we're at. So, I think that was a big part of the reason why I wanted a reset, just to get a centre clearance so we can get those mids involved in a one-on-one contest as opposed to a really congested situation. And despite stuffing up the quicker play a couple of times in that middle period of the game, I do think that's our go. I think we've got to quicken up our ball movement. The possession game, we're not skillful enough to have that work consistently. We saw it work for us in the first half against the Pies, and then the second half they tightened up on us and pushed up, and all of a sudden it didn't work. And I think it was the same here. Not to say that we were trying to play the exact same way. I don't think we were trying to play keepings off, an uncontested mark game, but it was a slower, more precise build-up off half-back, and it just wasn't working. It was sloppy, it was dangerous, it was resulting in the ball being turned over in really dangerous positions. So for me, I'd much prefer us to bite those trickier kicks off, but play it quickly and give our players 50-50 chances. At least if you turn it over in the middle of the ground, but you've gone fast, you haven't given West Coast the opportunity to flood back and fill gaps, but they just kept pressing back and not allowing us those easy kicks that we needed. So for me, a lot to unpack in the way that we turned over the footy and weren't able to transition the ball. But by the same token, it just, it felt a lot like a game out of 3 or 4 years ago where we were so used to seeing it. That was some of the worst transition and turnover stuff I'd seen probably all year, which is really disappointing because we were playing some really good footy before the bye, and to come back fresh and serve up that was really disappointing. Shinboner of the week, I think, could have gone to several players. Jai Simpkin's goal to win it, I think, has got him across the line for me. It could have been Finn O'Sullivan for his massive win on half back, or Cam Xerri for his mark and goal to put us in the lead. I think any of those would be worthy, but Jai Simpkin kicking the goal after he'd missed the initial one, particularly after that, I think made it even more special. You could see what it meant to him. He loves playing over in Perth, Jai Simpkin, or in WA at least. He had a really good Indigenous All-Stars game performance. He played really well when we had those wins over there a couple years ago. He just loves Perth, and I think it was a really resilient game from him. He went again. He buried the game in the last minute or so to win the game for us, and he had a pretty solid game all round. 23 disposals, 2 goals, 4 marks, couple of tackles, couple of clearances. I think he needs to be kicking goals when he's down forward. He's not going to be absolute pressure machine down there. So the fact that he was able to kick 2 goals, I think, is really important. And you can see 23 touches, 2 goals, 4 marks, 2 tackles, 2 clearances, just doing a bit of everything. He's not going to be a dominant midfielder if he's spending half his time forward, but he's got to be contributing in both of those areas of the ground. I think a real captain's performance in that last quarter from Jai Simpkin. So Shinboner of the week for him, and I think 2 votes for his performance as well. That late goal really pushed him from a 1 to a 2. A super important moment. In terms of the other voting, look, no one gets the 4. There wasn't anyone that was an absolute rip-snorting performance, but for the 3 votes, I couldn't go past Tristan Xerri. 22 disposals, 6 tackles, 37 hit-outs, 12 to advantage, 10 clearances, had a goal assist, 18 contested possessions, which was the most on the ground. And he was the one that got the ball going our way every single time. Except for that one blemish that I mentioned, I thought had a near-perfect game. Again, would love to see him marking the footy, but I think we have to come to terms with the fact that his ceiling for that's going to be pretty low. We just need to get him, a contested mark a game, a couple of marks a game would be great. But what he does in those ruck contests and his clearance work is just undeniable. He really bullied Flynn and was able to get himself into really good positions consistently, took the footy out of the ruck and was able to find teammates in space. If not, he was generally just kicking it forward and getting the ball going our way. And I thought that's why I wanted to see a bit of a reset in that middle period, because I think if you get him in the ruck in the middle of the ground, it opens up a lot for us. Certainly in the start of the game, the end of the game, when we were getting the ball going our way and we were able to transition it all started from him. So a really good game from Tristan Xerri, just consolidating himself and I think building a really strong case for All-Australian. I thought his first couple of games for the year were okay, but since then he's been a really strong performer, and I think it's going to be really hard for the selectors to not select him, even if it's 2 rucks. I know they don't like to select 2 rucks, but I think he would be super deserving. He's had his apprenticeship year last year, and this year he's been super consistent. So 3 votes for Xerri. 2 votes, I mentioned Simpkin above. He's getting 2 votes. Harry Sheezel also 2 votes. 28 disposals, 7 marks, 7 tackles, 3 clearances, 2 goal assists, 4 inside 50s, and 6 score involvements. And when the game was there to be won late, he stood up. I thought he was a little bit quiet in the first half. He wasn't necessarily winning the hard balls. He's been a long period of time on the bench just because of where the ball was at one point, but found the ball in tight and on the outside and was super clean in that last quarter where the game was to be won. I think a lot of those scoring chains that we were able to get going late in the game were the result of him getting going. So really impressive last quarter and game overall from Harry Sheezel, and I think we'd like to see more of this kind of stuff from him when he's playing that midfield forward role. He has to be standing up in these moments when the ball does go forward, and he did that. Finn O'Sullivan, 2 votes, 17 disposals, kicked a goal, like I mentioned, 5 marks, 3 tackles, and probably gone up from a 1 to a 2, just based on his interactions and his moments late in the game there. Like I said, kicked the goal that got us going, first goal for his career, and was just really composed and assured and showed why we liked him as high as we did in the draft. I thought his last month or so of football has been a level up from what we saw from him earlier in the year. Still playing some halfback, still playing some wing, but I think the more we see from him across every area of the ground, the more we go, okay, he is going to be a player of the future. He doesn't do Harley Reid type stuff where you go, oh my goodness, but when he gets the ball, you feel a level of comfort that he's going to know what to do. He's going to find himself some space and make a good decision. And I think that's probably what separates him from some of the other players in that draft class is he's got that ability to just make a couple of quick movements and create some space for himself in congestion, and he did that really well in this game. And then the other one that gets the 2 votes, Paul Curtis, 3 goals, 8 disposals, 2 marks, 3 tackles, just efficient. Like I mentioned, when he was involved, there were scores involved. He kicked 3 goals, was super strong in the contest. The 3 tackles really helped. We love his tackling down there in the forward half. He wasn't fantastic last week in his return game, but I think to see him return with the 3 goals here, he's back to that form that he had in the first half of the year, and he's still on track to be having a really, really good year. So a really nice performance from Paul Curtis. As we go to the 1 votes, I've got several here, which is interesting because we played poorly, but there were a lot of individuals that I thought, played their role or played a good role for the team. Tom Powell, 30 touches, 7 marks, 4 tackles, 5 clearances, 3 inside 50s, was our most prolific midfielder, found a lot of it in tight. I thought a solid game without doing much more. He did have some mistakes like that drop mark that I mentioned earlier on in the game, so certainly not a perfect game by him. Luke Parker, similar, 22 disposals, a goal, 6 marks, 7 tackles, 4 clearances, a goal assist. I think it's this sort of game where you see, this is why I got him across. It was just grunt, unassuming, reliable game, played his role perfectly, didn't really make a mistake, but didn't stand out from the crowd. So another strong performance from Luke Parker. Some of those half-backs now, Caleb Daniel, 29 touches, 740 metres gained, did his part when the game was hot early and when we were hot, he was distributing, and besides that error that I mentioned off the top, I thought was pretty strong. Colby McKerch is similar, 35 disposals, 5 clearances, 4 inside 50s, win at 89% disposal effectiveness. Got involved a lot off half-back with some really nice chains, and besides getting done by Harley Reid twice, I thought had a really solid game, really nice drive off half-back, and oftentimes, if he got involved, he got 2 or 3 or 4 disposals in that same chain and was running on to create space. So I thought a really promising game from him, and the fact that he was able to accumulate 35 touches is fantastic. We love a player that can find the footy that much. That being said, some of these halfback numbers are definitely inflated by the amount of ball or the amount of time the ball was down there in the back half. I mentioned some of these taller defenders, or I guess defensive-minded defenders. So Luke McDonald, 23 touches, 3 marks, 3 tackles, 4 spoils. I thought reliable and a couple of really nice moments where he committed himself. And Toby Pink, 10 disposals, 2 marks, 1 of those contested, 7 intercepts, 4 spoils. Shut down Oscar Allen in another really great game down back without the fuss and the flash that we've seen over his past couple of games. Just didn't really put a foot wrong in this one. And finally, Cam Xerri, maybe unlucky, maybe could have been a 2-voter, but 2 goals, 10 touches, 6 marks, 3 of those contested. And, this has probably been his most consistent season, I think. He played his role beautifully. He kicked the goal for us to take the lead after one of those contested marks. Could have easily been Shinboner of the week as well. Just standing up in big moments, I think, is the bull Cam Xerri. He's not necessarily accumulating. He hasn't kicked a big bag of goals, but he's been a really consistent goal kicker this year and performer this year. So that's been really promising. So just that's the end of the votes. Going over them again. 3 to Xerri, 2 to Simpkin, Sheasel, Finn O'Sullivan, and Curtis, and 1 to Powell, Parker, Daniel, McKercher, McDonald, Xerri, and Pink. In terms of what the standings look like then, Xerri's out to a solid lead now on 17, Sheasel's not far behind on 14, and Paul Curtis is into an outright third on 11. LDU, Simpkin 10, Parker, Powell, Xerri 9, McDonald 8, Larkey and Stevens 7, and then there's some 6s and 5s below that. So that's what it's looking like, just past the halfway mark now. And I think Xerri, although he's only 3 votes ahead of Sheasel, is going to be pretty hard to beat if his form continues the way it's been going. He's been yeah, he's been fantastic, Tristan Xerri, and like I mentioned, really, really hoping that he can get that All-Australian jacket this year. Thank you so much for supporting the show and for supporting me on North Pod. I do really appreciate it. If you'd like to show your support even more, you can share me with any other North Melbourne fans you know. Subscribe on your chosen podcast service, Apple, Spotify, YouTube. It's all there. Get involved with my social accounts at North Pod Show on X, Blue Sky, Instagram, etc. And if you would like to show an additional amount of support, you can find the Buy Me a Coffee link in the show notes, or I'm at buymeacoffee.com/Northpod Show. Kanger clipboard time, and a few things to discuss here. For me, something that really disappointed me coming out of the game was the two big losses at either end of the ground. So Griffin Logue, I thought, was bullied by Jack Williams. He's a lesser name for sure. He kicked 2 goals, 1, and had 6 marks. So it's not as though he kicked an absolute bag and dominated on the stats sheet. But every time that they were involved in a contest, Jack Williams had the better of Griffin Logue. He just looked to be outbodied, outled, and Logue was just too slow too often. I think there's a real issue for me with Logue's fitness and his game readiness. He's missed a lot of football over the past couple of years, and I think it's showing because when he first arrived, and played in that back half, particularly next to Ben Mackay, I thought, all right, we've got a defender, a mid-sized sort of key defender. He's not an absolute beast, but he's certainly a stronger player. And he looked really strong and promising before he went down with a couple of injuries. He just, to me, doesn't look like he's match ready at the moment, like his body's accustomed to playing AFL footy. So understand he came in for Aidan Corr and he was dropped earlier in the season. So yeah, he probably was deserving of another opportunity, but for me, he just needs more time at VFL level, not because he needs to find a form, but more I think he needs to get his match fitness and match readiness ready. He doesn't look like the player that we traded for at the moment, which is super disappointing because he is a player that should be in the prime of his career. That's one of the reasons that we got him across, is because he could be a sure head down there and a reliable defender. He looked like he was going to be that before this run of injuries. So he was definitely beaten by Jack Williams, which is disappointing. I wouldn't be surprised to see him dropped next week for either Aidan Corr if he was to return, or Callan Dawson potentially, or even like a Whitlock, for example, because we're going to need some key defenders. The Fremantle Dockers are a tall side in their forward line. They've got Tracy, they've got Amos, they've got Luke Jackson or Sean Darcy down forward at times as well. They've got some dangerous tall forwards, so we're going to need some informed players down there. And then at the other end of the ground, Harry Edwards just dominated Nick Larkey. Had a few nice marks up the ground, but besides that, it was all Edwards. If it was inside forward 50, Larkey was just smothered. Had 11 disposals, 6 marks, didn't kick a goal or a point, didn't hit the scoreboard. And I think for me, he's a bit of a watch. I'm not off him, but he needs to get up the ground and then get back fast. I like it when he's marking it on the wing at half back, but I don't think he's then moving on and then absolutely sprinting back to make the next contest. Obviously, as per always, our play doesn't suit him most of the time. Like, there's so much of our play, I think, allows opposition players to play well against him, or opposition teams to swarm him and force him into contested marking situations, which is not his strength. So I don't think it's all his fault, but the fact that in a game like this he wasn't even able to hit the scoreboard says to me that there's probably something that needs to change. Now, you're not dropping Nick Larkey at the moment, absolutely not. I'm not suggesting that, and I think anyone that says that isn't watching the games closely enough. But I do think something needs to change with our setup there, or with the way that he's involved in that setup. Because, Harry Edwards is a good player, but he's not a player that should be holding Nick Larkey goalless in a game like this where West Coast's side is as depleted as it is. So those two, losses at either end of the ground were a concern. They're a big part of why we weren't able to hit the scoreboard and defend as strongly as we would like to. We're pretty fortunate that other defenders and were able to pick up a bit of slack, and Oscar Allen didn't get off the chain, Liam Ryan didn't get off the chain. We also didn't. We're also fortunate that Curtis and Xerri were playing pretty efficient games, but we can't afford to have Larkey not performing like this too often. So I'll back him to back it up next week and play a much better game against Freo, but he is a watch for me at the moment. I think trying to take a bit of a positive lens on the game, the fact that from 18 points down in that last quarter, we were able to rally is a great achievement given our recent struggles. Now, it moves us out of the bottom two, which I think has to give us a small amount of belief. I'm not suggesting that it's about to turn and we're going to make a run for the finals, but I think getting out of that bottom two mentally is important. We're still a game and a half out of moving into that next ladder position, so we're pretty locked into that 16th place for now, but things can change. I think there's 5 teams on 20 points on the 5 wins, and we've got 3.5 wins. So there'll definitely be opportunities to catch 1 or 2 of them as the year goes on. I'm not expecting it necessarily to be clear, but we'll have to take our opportunities. We're going to have to win the other game against Richmond. We're going to have to find ways to beat other sides that are around the mark for us. And looking at the fixture always looks tough for us because we're not a good side. So most of the teams we're playing are going to be better than us. Yeah, I think regardless, this game highlights that a lot of our issues are the decisions that we make and not necessarily just the skill errors that you see. When we've got time and we're trying to play a slower style, it breaks down. When the game is simplified and it's contested and it's a clearance game, we dominate. So X is a big part of that, but it also brings some of our better players into it, like LDU, like Sheasel, like Simpkin. And then that means that the ball is moving faster into someone like Nick Larkey and giving him much better opportunities. So I don't think we can afford to rest on the laurels of winning this game, to be clear. I'm not celebrating the win, but I think this is a game that last year, 2 years ago, after we'd sort of had our back broken and we went 18 points down, we don't come back to win. So the positive is that we're able to be a little bit resilient and we're able to fight back and win the game, even though, like I mentioned earlier on, I do think a big part of that was West Coast allowing it. But I do think we've got to acknowledge we've beaten the 2 sides that are worse than us, the Tigers and the Eagles, and we didn't play well in either of those games. We played a little bit down to their level, but the fact that we're able to still win the game is massive. We obviously played really well against Melbourne. We're able to win that one. We didn't play well against Brisbane and we're still able to draw that game. So, I think that the next step, you don't want to only be able to win when you're playing good football. The weird thing at the moment is that we're not able to win when we're playing really well because we're playing better sides and we play a poor game against a poor side and we're still able to win. It's a bit of a conundrum. I guess we take the win and we move on as fans, like we said, but I do hope there's plenty going on behind the scenes. Still looking for a little bit more from too many players. Like Zach Fisher hasn't showed me anything to suggest that he's a long-term piece for us in a meaningful way. He kicked the 3 points in this one, was more of a wing half-forwarder. And I didn't find enough of the football or wasn't damaging enough to convince me that that's going to be, a fantastic move long term. Griffin Logue, as I mentioned, he's out of touch big time. Robert Hansen Jr. was the sub in fairness, but didn't impact the game in his time on the ground. Beyond that one moment where he won, Griffin Logue kicked it to him ironically and he wasn't on, but was able to win the footy and get it going forward. I didn't see any game-breaking pace or electricity from Robert Hansen Jr. in his minutes on the ground. I mentioned Larkey above. Jack Darling's another one, just not as effective as he was earlier in the season. And I don't need Jack Darling kicking bags, but I think we need to see him marking it more and getting more involved in the footy. He doesn't really get beaten one-on-one. Like that's a fantastic element of his game. Like Larkey will get beaten one-on-one. He will get outmarked. We're not really seeing Jack Darling getting outmarked, but I just don't know that in this game we saw enough of him competing and setting up opportunities for teammates. And then, the midfielders, Wardlaw completely lacked any impact with the football. He tackled well, he pressured well, but his impact with the football was almost non-existent. LDU is not playing like a multi-million-dollar player at the moment. I'm not suggesting that that we drop him either for what it's worth. It's more a reflection of the expectations that just have to be placed on him. He is a player that is going to be taking up a large chunk of our salary cap for the next period of time. And the fact that in a game like this where it's not all going his way, he's not able to work his way into it, I think is a bit of a concern. So there is a lot of work and development to come from these types of players that just weren't able to get themselves either involved in the game or were negatively impacting the game in some aspects. And then the final note here, I think, more of an umpiring note, but not against the umpires. It's more around the way that they're being asked to adjudicate it. I've seen it several times in this game, and across the year, it's been a bit of a trend. It seems as though you can no longer bump a player as they're disposing of it. I understand that we don't want late hits. You don't want someone who's just disposed of it to be taken out, because you are vulnerable as a kicker or even a hand passer. You're vulnerable if you're disposing of the ball. And so I think it's reasonable that if you are disposing of the football and you're getting bumped or pressured, it's reasonable to expect that. But when you've kicked it and the ball's moved on and then you receive a bump, that's unreasonable. And that's always been my interpretation. I think that's how most people feel about it. I feel as though there were several examples in this game where the player was bumped as they were kicking it and a free kick was still paid. To me, that's not how the game should be umpired. I'm sure that the umpires are being instructed to err on the side of caution in this one and pay a free kick, because we do want to reduce, obviously, those heavy head collisions and just bumps off the ball that are unnecessary. But for me, you've got to understand the intent. You're allowed to pressure someone who's kicking the ball, I would have thought. And it seems as though what the umpires and what the AFL is expecting players to do is just to disappear themselves as soon as the player disposes of the footy, so that you don't run into them. I don't understand it. I understand a lot of the things that the AFL is doing in terms of changing the tackling rules and trying to protect the head. This is not one that I understand, because unless you are leaving the ground and collecting their head as they kick the football, absolutely free kick. But if you're bumping them shoulder to shoulder as they're kicking it, that you should be allowed to do that. And I think that the rules definitely say that, but the way it's being interpreted at the moment, it's just not sitting right for me. So that's just a bit of a rant, I suppose, but something I've noticed, particularly in this game, and it's crept in the last few games, that I don't love that look. For the way the game is played, you should be able to bump a player as they're disposing of the ball. Last segment here around Arden Street, and there are a couple of things to touch on in this week's segment. The VFL had another win. I think they've had 3 on the trot now. It's great to have the VFL side up and about. It's great for the reserves players to be getting a good opportunity in a competitive side. 85-44 over Williamstown, Werribee. And Wilfield, a casual 21 tackles to go with his 22 disposals and 5 clearances. I think that's a bit of a statement that, if one of these midfielders like Wardlaw is not going to perform and not be able to find the footy, he's ready to step in. I know there are a lot of fans that are sort of clambering for Wilfield to come into the side, so that's not going to hurt his cause. Bailey's got 26 disposals. Couldn't tell you how effective they were, but at least he's finding the footy, which is something that he wasn't doing at AFL level. Will Dawson still playing that forward role, kicked a goal. CCJ got through the game, which is positive for him and his recovery. Zane Dersma kicked a goal and had 12 touches. Braden George on his comeback trail kicked a couple of goals, which is really nice. And then someone I'm about to talk about from the mid-season draft, Zach Banch, came in and kicked 3 goals against his former side, which is a little ironic, but it's great to see him hitting the scoreboard. So, look, plenty of players that are at least knocking on the door, whilst they're not thumping it down and bursting in. I think there's definitely some players there that are ready to contribute. Like I said, Cooper Harvey didn't play. I think he was a travelling emergency, and he's also been in some really good goal-scoring form. So, in the forward half, I think it's great to see he's ready to come in. I think Wilfield's knocking on the door as a midfielder. And then we know in the back half, Callum Dawson's been playing some pretty good footy, ready to come in if we're looking to replace Griffin Logue. So that's positive. You want that pressure coming through the twos. And then the mid-season draft did happen. I obviously planned to speak about it last week, just after it had occurred, but that didn't transpire. But we took 2 players. So Zach Banch, the one that I just mentioned, he's a 22-year-old small forward. He is very small. I think he might be 173 centimetres, but he looks like a likely type. He is more of a goal-kicking small forward, which is nice. I guess Robert Hansen Jr. is supposed to be that if he's playing in the forward half, but has been spending a lot of time on the wing. Jake, you could stand, he can definitely kick goals, but he's primarily there for his pressure. So it'll be interesting to see, what we do with Zach Bench, whether or not we bring him in for a game this year. I think he's a chance, but you would like to think that Cooper Harvey would get a chance before him, because you'd want to get a look at him, I think, before the end of the year. It'd be really hard to make a decision on him just based on VFL form. But yeah, Zach Bench looks like a likely type, a bit more mature age, 22, so that probably is important for a player of his stature, that you want someone that's a bit stronger. He looks strong. He's got some serious arm cannons. And yeah, the fact that he was able to come in without necessarily knowing the structures of the team and kick 3 goals is promising. The other was definitely more of a speculative pick on our part, Cooper Trembath. 19-year-old, 193 centimetre tall, that can play either end, but it seems as though we like him as a forward. My understanding is he's played a lot of his juniors as a defender, and at 193, he's not a beast. He's going to be more of a Griffin Logue size. Played one game in the VFL for us and kicked a few goals, and besides that, hasn't played a lot of senior football. So you would think he's going to be a long-term prospect. He's going to be one that you hope comes off, but you're not necessarily banking on it. And I think it is important that we have some realistic expectations about the mid-season draft. Whilst everyone wants to get the next John Newcomb or what's the one from Essendon? It'll come to me in a minute. Like, everyone wants that player that is an easily best 22 player. But they're hard to find at the mid-season draft just because of what it is. They're players that are mature ages, or they've just missed the draft. They're not absolute high-quality elite talent. They're just not going to be. So whilst we've certainly made some bad picks in the draft, in the mid-season draft, I do sometimes think that fan expectations need to be in line with what it actually is. And it's a mid-season draft that is supposed to give you an opportunity to top up due to injuries, and or to take someone that is a bit of a longer term prospect or a bit of a gamble. So I think that's what these two players are. I certainly wouldn't expect to see Trembath at AFL level this season, but I think Zach Bench is a chance. And then the other news from the week, Josh Goda, who we know seems to be on return from injury constantly at the moment. He's come back from the Achilles, but is now fighting some other leg injuries. I think it might have been a quad maybe, or a groin. He's re-signed for another year, which I think is good for him. So he was due to come out of contract end of this year. He's just extended to the end of next year, which gives him that opportunity to hopefully get back to AFL level and show what he can do. I think in theory he's a really important player for us, but yeah, it's a bit of a worry, I guess, because we can see a bit of a trend with his injuries of late. So we want to see him get fit. Next week, we're still in Perth. This is our two games stay over in Perth. We're playing Fremantle this time, actually in Perth, not in Bunbury. Saturday night, so 7:35 Melbourne time. It's more of a twilight game over there in Perth, and it's a dangerous game for us. Freo finally hit some form. It's going to be pretty hard, I think, to pick us in this game, just going into it knowing the sort of form that Freo's in. Like I mentioned earlier on, they've got some pretty dangerous tall forwards, and our tall defenders, we lack a little in size. If Chom is injured, that's going to be a concern. We're going to need at least one, maybe two replacements there, and maybe that's what saves Griffin Logue, to be honest. If Chom's not able to be there, potentially you try and slot Logue into that loose role, and you bring in a Callan Dawson or someone else to play more of a lockdown role. But it should be a really good, interesting midfield battle. Freo's got a really strong midfield. They're a good contested game with Sarong and Brayshaw going through there. And, in theory, that's a strength of ours as well. We know Tristan Xerri is a strength of ours in the ruck, but Luke Jackson is a different kind of ruck. It's going to be interesting to see those two go head-to-head because, they're both really good rucks, but in different ways. So certainly going in with low expectations. This West Coast game, I had expectations that we would win. I was pretty nervous about how it was going to go, but I had expectations. I don't share those expectations for the Freo game, but like always, we want to compete. So hopefully we are able to do that. Hopefully a bit of bonding time for the lads staying over there in Perth. They're able to, bond and build that team chemistry, because that's something that we need to. I think that's the sort of thing that often comes out of winning, and we don't do a lot of that at the moment. So that is going to do it for me. Thank you, as always, for listening. I really appreciate it. And I'll be back next week to talk about what's come of our week stay over in Perth. Have a great week. Speak to you then. And as always, go North. Thanks for listening to another episode of NorthPod. If you give me a rating or review on your podcast service, that would be much appreciated. And please follow me on all social media at NorthPod Show. I'm on X or Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and I'm also very active on the North Melbourne subreddit. Hope you'll join me for the next episode.